Chapter 5 of A Stranger at Home, on page 57. I had a fitful sleep that night. It was the same bad dream over and over again, every time I closed my eyes. I dreamed that I was back at the outsider school, locked inside the skirt of one of the nuns' habits. The nun told me that she would let me out if I could remember my name and if my mother could recognize me. My parents and the others from the village had become very small. They pointed through the bars and laughed. Agnes knew where the key was to free me, but in the distance I could see her aboard the North Star, sailing away to Banks Island without me. It was late when my mother finally woke me. My sisters had already run off to play with their friends. My mother was tired of hearing them complain about being cooped up and had finally decided that there was no harm in letting them run loose. Above me, my brother was playing with a ball on my parents' bed. I kneeled and began to say my prayers. My mother pulled me to my feet. I backed away from her, fighting down fury. How could she stop me from doing something so important? How could she condemn me to damnation along with the rest of my family? But she seemed oblivious to my anger. The look on her face was eager, childlike. In her hand, she held the book I had been reading. She tugged me by the arm, nodding for me to come. My prayers would have to wait. I joined her at the table where a cold piece of bannock was waiting for me. I fell upon it, ravenous. My mother set the book in front of us and pointed at it. Read, she said, in a Nuvliuctan. I swallowed the bannock in my mouth. Gulliver's Travels, I said out loud. No, she said in English, shaking her head, and then she repeated the word. Read. I wasn't sure what she wanted of me, so I opened the book and began reading aloud. No, she said again, and pointed from the page to herself. Me. My mother wanted me to teach her to read, but it wasn't as simple as opening the book and doing it. She didn't even know how to speak English. How could she expect to read it? I thought for a moment while I chewed and swallowed another bite. Maybe if I taught her to write her name, she would be satisfied. I found a small scrap of paper and a pencil and printed her name, which happened to be the same as that of my father's favorite singer, Lena. Then I handed the paper to her and pointed for her to write below it. She shook her head like a shy student. I handed her the pencil and smiled to reassure her. The pencil was awkward in her hand. First, she held it in her palm as if it were a rocker like ulu knife, but she soon realized she could not write like that. Then she tried holding it as she would a sewing needle. She was very skilled with both of those instruments, but no one had ever taught her how to hold a pencil. She fumbled with it, and it fell to the floor. I picked it up and gave it to her again. She took it reluctantly, grasping it in her palm. I pulled it out of her hand and slipped it between her pointer and middle finger and helped her to draw the first letter. Her expression brightened. I let go of her hand so that she could do it herself. She pressed too hard. The lead broke and the pencil went flying. I rose to retrieve it, but she crumpled and tore the paper in her hands and threw it down. I was silent. Why couldn't she ask my father to teach her? He could explain to her in Inuviaktun what she needed to do. I didn't want my mother to think I didn't believe she was smart enough to learn. But she tossed Rosie's book at me angrily. I had no way to tell her why I wasn't giving her the magic secret it would take to read the book. When I didn't say anything, she yelled at me. I shut my ears to her until the world was silent, then pulled my hammock onto my tender feet. I ran toward town, cut down the bank at the Hudson's Bay Company, and ran along the shore faster and faster. I had strong legs and loved to run, especially there, where I could feel the salt in my lungs. I was in full stride when a stone dropped me, and I fell, skinning my knees. I rolled over and pulled the hammock off my throbbing foot. The pad near my big toe was already bruised and swollen. I had spent 2 years cursing the outsider shoes and longing for the footwear of my people. Now that I had them, Every pebble pierced the soft skin of my feet. The pain made me angry, and that gave me energy, so I stood up and ran again, ignoring the stinging in my knees and foot. I didn't stop until I reached a large tide pool. I found a place to sit, and I sank my throbbing, swollen foot into the cold water. Soon it felt numb. When I had caught my breath again, I realized I couldn't run anymore, so I hobbled back toward the Hudson's Bay store, moving no faster than the wisp of cloud above me. I was in no hurry to go home. Children played in front of one of the houses, but I pretended not to see them. A woman came out of her cabin and stopped me. She was friendly and chattered away. I knew her from Banks Island. She had wintered there, like my family, until her husband died. She was very old and elder, and I didn't want to show her disrespect. She waited for my answers at first with anticipation, and then with annoyance, but I had no idea what she was saying. All I could reply was, "Sorry." Disgusted by my rudeness, she threw her hands into the air and walked back to her cabin, shaking her head and muttering to herself. My mother was already angry enough. When she heard about this, I was sure to be in trouble. Not only had I disrespected an elder, but I had also made it public that I was like an outsider now. I was afraid of everyone I passed the rest of the way. I was fearful that my own people would try to talk to me and be angry when I couldn't answer. And I was even more fearful of the two English speaking missionaries I saw standing outside the small log cabin church. I was scared that they would take me into that dark church and make me kneel and pray to make up for being a bad daughter, for doing something to embarrass my parents, and more importantly, for not convincing them to say grace. I never wanted to see or speak to another person again. I breathed a huge sigh of relief when I caught sight of our tent. I greeted my mother and father stoically. Oops, sorry. Holding back the sadness that filled my heart and disappeared inside. I pulled off my hammock and rubbed my raw and bruised feet between my hands. Then I did something I never could have predicted. I took my school stockings out from under my parents' bed where I had stowed them. I put on the thick gray wool tights and slipped my feet into my canvas runners. The first time I had put my feet in outsider shoes, they had pinched and felt hard and awkward. Now they were a barrier, protection against the hard earth. I left the tent more comfortable than I had entered it, though even in the runners my feet ached. I did not say a word to my parents. Once again, I didn't have the Inuktitut words to explain myself to them. I stood beside my father and waited for him to give me a job to do. End of chapter 5 on page 65.